I find it strange that the Australian government, our allies, our friends, our good friends, do not ban Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is a terror organization, and the idea is that it is well financed, equipped and trained by Iran, which is unique phenomena. People that are wearing parallel their kafiyas and their diplomatic suit. If they want, they have their embassy and they act like diplomats and they are a part of family of nations. But we know that Iran is the living spring of terrorism all around the globe.
So welcome to Frank Talk. Today my guest is Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, who is sitting in Israel. Where am I finding you, Gal?
Right now in Israel, the weather is real summer. We all suffer from terrible humidity, and the degrees are in a period in a way that never happened for 100 years, for the people who remembers, yes? So the weather is really summer.
What do you get at the moment? 50 degrees?
Yes, actually, in the northern part of Israel, very close to the Sea of Galilee, for example, it's very close to 50 degrees. Around Tel Aviv, it is very close to 40 degrees. But the problem is the humidity, because we never had 90% humidity. It's really rare. But that's summer, and very soon there will be Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, according to the Jewish tradition. And we're looking forward for the new year and the new weather as well, and maybe even a new situation with COVID-19.
Yeah, hopefully. So, Gal, I wanted to have a chat with you because, of course, you were the general in charge of the war with Lebanon in 2006. You had over 90,000 people under your command. And if you don't mind, for those of our listeners that don't know you, are you able to reintroduce yourself?
Well, first of all, I believe that I'm one of the good friends of Mr. Albert Dadon. Maybe that can work best for me in Australia, isn't it? And actually, I'm serving since I was 14 years old as a cadet in the Israel Defense Forces Military Academy, then been recruited to the Israel Defense Forces paratroopers, being an operator, platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander, brigade commander, division commander, and in charge of operations in Judea and Samaria, Jordan Valley and other places, and being in command of the Israeli Special Forces and Officer Training School as well. So many years in service, and in the last few years I'm an active reserve general in the Israel Defense Forces, and serving every week in specific missions and positions in the Depth Command, which is a new command in the Israel Defense Forces that we do not talk about. And parallel, I believe I'm an expert with innovation, strategy, and leadership. And I'm unfortunately quite expert with fighting against Hezbollah, because since the mid-80s, Hezbollah started as a new phenomena in Lebanon, and since then they affect our lives in Israel and affect the lives of many other people worldwide.
So Gal, since that explosion on the 4th of August that you know, and maybe you will tell us exactly what you know about it, but the Australian government has been sending a lot of humanitarian aid to Lebanon, but I would have thought that that was a great opportunity to finally ban Hezbollah totally, and they haven't done so.
Well, thank you. During the 80s, as I believe everybody knows, we have finished the first Lebanon war in 1982 with a decisive victory on the Palestinian terror organizations headed by Yasser Arafat. And the dream in Israel, and not only in Israel, in Lebanon also, was that we will be able to establish stable peace agreement between us and Lebanon. But unfortunately, it was only a dream. In the mid 80s, we saw that inside Lebanon, which is not a stable place, entered strong effects from Tehran. Let me remind our audience and all the participants in this special group that in the late 70s, 1979, there was the coup in Tehran, in Iran. And the Shah regime, that was really an ally with Israel, with the United States of America, and with the free world, actually is being collapsed by the Ayatollahs. That has happened in 1979. And after they first took complete control on Iran, they started to look for the ways to export the Islamic Revolution worldwide. Because that's the policy of the Ayatollahs regime in Iran. They were looking also for a direct and immediate accessibility to the state of Israel and to the free world, because Iran is quite far away from Israel. And in order to be an empire, they knew that they need to have a nuclear program. And they would like to develop an atomic bomb in order to create deterrence, and maybe even to use it in order to make sure that the state of Israel, as they call it, the Zionist entity, will disappear by atomic bomb, Iranian atomic bomb. And they knew the Begin doctrine. Menachem Begin's doctrine was that there will not be any nation close to Israel in the Middle East that claim and declare that they're going to destroy the state of Israel and will hold a nuclear program, I mean military nuclear program. And Begin doctrine, as you know, destroyed, for example, the Iraqi nuclear reactor Usirak next to Baghdad, because Saddam Hussein, Iraqi tyrant, actually mentioned many times that he will make sure that the state of Israel will disappear. So the Iranians wanted to make sure that they will have nuclear program, a military one. The Begin doctrine was a real threat on it, and they wanted to deter Israel from attacking the nuclear program in Iran. Now, in order to deter us, they need, first of all, to be able to deter us. How can they deter us when they are so far away in Tehran? So they understood that they need to build armies that will actually deploy themselves along the Israeli borders. And they decided to take the vacuum of Lebanon as exactly the right place to build an Iranian army and to deploy it along the Israeli borders. So 5 years after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they started to build Hezbollah. Hezbollah in the beginning was a small militia in the southern part of Lebanon, an authentic Shiite militia. They actually built themselves in order to protect the Shiite villages, which was really a minority in Lebanon. It was really an authentic Shiite movement. But the Iranians, since they wanted to build army that will be deployed along the Israeli borders and deter Israel from attacking their nuclear military program in Iran, they have decided to find and identify potential army inside Lebanon and build it and develop it. That's what they did with Hezbollah. Since the mid-80s, Hezbollah started to be built by Iran, started as a small militia, as mentioned, then a battalion, then a brigade, then a division. Today, it's an army.
And it's interesting, Gal, how they did it, because they did it despite the official Lebanese army, didn't they?
Actually, Lebanon is an ungoverned area for many years. It's for decades not a stable place, divided between different religions, always civil wars inside. Lebanon, it's an ungoverned area and it creates a type of vacuum. And
But for how long? For how long was it an ungoverned area? Because for a long time, Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East, and all the good things we know about Lebanon. So at some stage, Lebanon was a stable place.
It was stable mainly until the late 60s. In the beginning of the 70s, the Palestinian terror organizations that had been actually thrown away from Jordan by King Hussein the Late actually moved to Lebanon, entered inside Lebanon, and that's what they call Black September. It was in September 70, and they moved into Lebanon and built there what they called Fatah land, actually the land of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and all Lebanon became actually a terror base under the control of Yasser Arafat and his troops.
Hello everyone, thank you for watching Frank Talk. And if you are watching us on YouTube or Facebook, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to leave us a comment. If you are listening to us on a podcast, give us a 5-star review and a comment. And I won't take any more of your time. Let's go back to the show. Gal, if I take you back in time, since 1948, there were refugees that were Palestinians in the southern Lebanon. I mean, we know the unfortunate reputation of Sabra and Shatila. Those were refugee camps of Palestinians that were there since the late 40s. So it was since then that you had some Palestinians there. But Yasser Arafat, wasn't he banned from Jordan late 70s, wasn't it? Late 70s?
No, the beginning of the 70s. Black September 70, 1970. Mm-hmm. And you're right, there were always Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, but they were very close to Beirut. Even Sabra and Shatila is much closer to Beirut in the northern part of Lebanon and not close to the Israeli border. So since 1948, the Independence War, where there were battles between Jewish people, the newly born state of Israel, and people and forces from Lebanon, since 1948, the Lebanese border was peaceful and quiet until the beginning of the 1970s. Nothing was there, even not real divisions or forces, because the only challenge that were there were smugglers or, criminal activity from time to time. It was really a peaceful border. There was no friction between Israel and Lebanon until the beginning of the 70s. And that was as a result of implementation or the new deployment of Palestinian forces that were thrown away from Jordan and started to build the terror land inside Lebanon. So it started in the beginning of the 70s. And along the 70s, Lebanon became a very big threat for Israel because there were so many hostage situations and rockets events and shooting events until 1982, where the state of Israel said enough is enough. There was casus belli, the assassination attempt in London against the Israeli ambassador Argov. That was 1982. And then Israel went into war with Lebanon and dismantled the Palestinian terror organizations of Yasser Arafat, and they've been thrown away to Tunisia. That was 1982. So we have about 12 years from the beginning of the 1970 until 1982 that Lebanon is actually controlled by the Palestinian terror organizations, and in parallel with that there is a civil war inside because the Syrians are inside and the Druze are fighting against Muslims and Christians and everyone inside is fighting against each other. Lebanon was never stable since the beginning of the 70s, and the main cause for instability were the Palestinians that actually arrived from Jordan and broke the stability inside Lebanon. So if I just make the whole picture for our audience, Lebanon is a stable place until beginning of 70s. From the 70s until 1982, terror events on daily basis. by the Palestinian terror organizations. 1982, the State of Israel going to the First Lebanon War and actually occupy Lebanon and trying to stabilize it. That's from 1982. There were few attempts to create peace between 1982 after the Palestinian terror organization are thrown away to Tunisia, and in the mid-parallel the Iranian Revolution is happening in 1979, and in the beginning of the 80s the Iranians identifies Lebanon as the right place to build an Iranian army that will be deployed along the borders with Israel. Now, as we know, they did it first in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Then they did it after our disengagement from Gaza Strip. They did it with Islamic jihadists and Hamas and built another Iranian army in Gaza Strip. They are trying to do that right now in Syria by building Iranian militias in Syria. They tried to do that in Sinai Peninsula, actually in building inside Egypt Hezbollah forces, using Bedouin tribes in order to transform them into Hezbollah type organizations. They failed, mainly because of President Mubarak's struggle against that, and they failed. This is why it was ISIS, Daesh, that took control of Sinai Peninsula and not Hezbollah. And they are doing the same in Yemen. And today, as we know, the Houthis in Yemen are completely supported by Hezbollah and by Iran. And they are doing that in Iraq. So as we see, the Iranians are surrounding us by Iranian forces, terror armies. This is the mission of Quds Force that was headed by Qasem Soleimani. As we know, Qasem Soleimani somehow found his death one night actually. But Quds Force is actually the branch of the Revolutionary Guard of Tehran in order to build around Israel, close to the free world, Iranian armies that will deter Israel from attacking the nuclear military program in Iran and create terror bases to attack Israel, but not only Israel. So what we can see when we speak about Hezbollah, that Hezbollah is not an authentic Lebanese army. Actually, the Iranians captured and took hostage all the state of Lebanon. And they are holding Lebanon with big force, big army. It was, as I mentioned in the beginning, it was a battalion or brigade. Today it's one of the biggest armies in the Middle East. Well equipped, well trained, well financed. And they use it along the borders with Israel, but not only. Because Hezbollah instructors are all around the area, as I mentioned before, trying to create instability, and Hezbollah forces are in Syria in order to make sure that Iran will be able to build a new type of Lebanon inside Syria, because Syria as well is not stabilized, gone through terrible civil war, and was a great opportunity for Iran to build new type of Lebanon in Syria. So the Iranians are looking, the Iranian strategy is looking for UGAs, ungoverned areas, and create inside this type of vacuum, create an Iranian, let's say, embassy, an Iranian army like they did in Lebanon. Now the problem, and this is one of my biggest disappointment, and let me tell you frankly that I find it strange that the Australian government, our allies, our friends, our good friends, do not ban Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is a terror organization, and the idea is that it is well financed, equipped, and trained by Iran, which is unique phenomena. People that are wearing parallel their kafiyas and their diplomatic suits. If they want, they have their embassy and they act like diplomats and they are a part of family of nations. But we know that Iran is the living spring of terrorism all around the globe. Who was in charge of the terrible terror attacks in Buenos Aires against the Jewish community? Who was in charge of the assassination attempt against the diplomats in New Delhi, Israeli diplomats? Hezbollah by Iran. Who did it in Bangkok, in Thailand? Revolutionary Guard by Iran. Who did it in Burgas, Bulgaria? Few years ago, Hezbollah forces as under a directive from Iran. Who did so many attacks with rockets from Gaza Strip? Who is playing with us through Gaza, through Lebanon, through Syria, through Yemen? Who is trying to attack Saudi Arabia, a moderate state that is a part of the US coalition? Who's attacking them 24/7 from Yemen? Yemen was such a small, peaceful place until Iran identified it as a big opportunity to build new Iranian army, the Houthis militia, inside Yemen. And today they attack from Yemen, they attack airports in Riyadh, they attack facilities of oil and energy in Saudi Arabia. They are attacking everything that is connected to the free world and to United States of America and to democracies. They want to be an empire. They want to make sure that they will have nuclear military program. Iran is a big problem. Now, the disappointment that I feel and I would like to share with you is that I really do not understand how Australian government, that I so appreciate, do not understand that Hezbollah is using civil type of organizations, even business, criminal organizations, and military organizations in order actually to serve the Iranian policy of exporting the Islamic Revolution. And they are doing that by terror activities, money laundering, drug dealing, criminal activities, attacking many people worldwide. Hezbollah is their main and most successful terror army, and when Hezbollah is acting today, it is not only towards Israel, it's a global instability creator.
As you know, Gal, it took a long time to Germany to come to the party. Now the Germans a few months ago have totally banned Hezbollah, which is seriously limiting them in Europe. But the Germans only did that once they found out that they were themselves threatened directly in their territory. It will probably take some sort of realization for the Australians to do that once they realize that Australia is not so far away. But in actual fact, we know it's not that far away because there are issues with Australia already. And so do you have examples to tell us and tell those members of government that may listen to this program as to what you know that is happening with Australia?
Well, there are issues that I made sure that Australian governmental entities will know by our officials, that information will be sent to Australia, and I'm not able to discuss it from here.
But suffice to know that there are issues.
There are issues, and there are real dangerous issues. There is a real danger today because inside Australia there is Hezbollah activity. And you need to know that when you let the snake living inside your flat, it's not that good idea. One day you'll wake up or not wake up. You know, it's a matter of the snake's decision. And you have Hezbollah activities inside Australia. They are hiding behind different type of costumes. There sometimes looks like civil activities. it looks like they take good care for poor people. They are very close to other Muslim organizations in the Pacific, and there are connections between Hezbollah organizations in Australia and Hezbollah infrastructure in the Far East. And you need to know that it is Iran, the head of the snake behind all that. They create a type of net, and one day you'll wake up when you'll have war inside your home. Now, do not forget that we told for many years, we Israelis told for many years the rest of the world, look, we are your front guard. If you are criticizing us for being too offensive, too aggressive, too impulsive, or too paranoid, one day you wake up when these forces will bypass Israel, infiltrate through Israel, because we are living on the living spring of terrorism in the Middle East, and you find all these activities inside your neighborhoods. Now, the people that did not believe us for many, many decades actually found themselves one day with terror attacks in Manhattan, in Washington, D.C., in San Bernardino, in Bali, in Beslan, in Nairobi, in Madrid, in London, in Paris, and actually all around the globe. Terror activities, and for many years we that were actually the main fortress in confronting terrorism been criticized by hypocrites that told us that we are too paranoid. We are not paranoid. There is really someone there that is running after us, believe me, and actually it is running after you as well. You just do not know that, you do not want to believe, but you let Hezbollah first to capture a nation, Lebanon, that really wants to live in peace, and to take it as hostages. Second, to let one minute, Albert, to let Iran actually surround Israel by many other terror armies, and Israel is your ally. And you let them be around us and attack us, to let them attack diplomats and Jewish infrastructure and many others worldwide, and just to let it happen. It doesn't sound like friendship to me. It is not the right way to take Hezbollah as a challenge. The right way is actually to ban Hezbollah, just as Germany did, just as the British government understood when they found Hezbollah explosives in the middle of London. So actually, do not wait to find Hezbollah infrastructure deep inside neighborhoods in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, or in Canberra. Do not wait for that. Just, first of all, help your comrades, your allies. Second, protect yourself.
Christopher Pine, our good friend, puts it in a good way. He always says that Israel is the canary in the coal mine. I think that summarizes it, and you're totally right. There are so many things that aren't going right at the moment, but this is definitely one of them, and it has a really potential that is incredibly dangerous. But Gal, I'm wondering if you can reflect on the strategy of Hezbollah. If you put your shoes in Nasrallah's shoes, the head of Hezbollah, I mean, it is a very clever strategy to play to the weakness of the Western democracies, because they've got charities, they've got a political party, they've got so many branches that make some of our good doers in our sides of the world to say, but they're not all bad. What do you say to that?
Well, you need to know that this is really a manipulation and really a part of the strategy and policy. It is not only by Iran and Hezbollah. Always terror organizations were hiding behind charity organizations. It's a strategy of terrorism, mainly in order to use and manipulate the morals and values of the free world and the morals and values of democracies. And it is not only Hezbollah, even ISIS and radical fundamental jihadists in Europe are hiding until today behind charity organizations. And one day you wake up in Paris when the Bataclan Club is under attack and people are shooting in the street, and in the French Riviera terrorists take a truck and kill 83 people in low-tech terrorism, and it happens in Berlin as well, and it happens in London, and it happens in Madrid, and it's happened in Belgium. It's gonna happen everywhere, because radical fundamental jihadist energy is really a type of shadow. It is everywhere, and if you are not active and just believe that this is charity and good values and Muslims really have the right to live everywhere around the globe, that's correct. No problems with Muslims. There is a big problem with terror organizations that are hiding behind charity stories. It is not really the truth. And this is exactly the way that they try to do that also in Judea and Samaria and Gaza Strip here, and it happens worldwide.
You must be finding comfort, though, that the United States has many operations. I believe the latest one is called Operation Cedar, where one of the branches of the Attorney General is going after Hezbollah. What I'm finding surprising is the lack of convincing efforts that they're putting on this with Australia.
I cannot really understand it, because the Australian armed forces were always a part of the good side. And thanks God and thanks Australians that they were always so effective in being a part in any war against tyrants, against terrorists, against real enemies of the free world. It has happened in Iraq, it has happened in Afghanistan, it is happening everywhere. And during the First World War and the Second World War, Australia was an important component of the war against evil forces. What is going on now? What has happened? Don't you see what Hezbollah is? Do you really believe Nasrallah or the Ayatollahs or Quds Force or Revolutionary Guards? Don't you see what they are doing around us, and not only around us? Are you waiting to suffer September 11th in Australia just to be convinced? What are you waiting for?
So there is, of course, the French that are making some diplomatic efforts with the current leaders of the Lebanese regime, which to me it's a bit of a farce, but it's possible that the Australians are listening to that, though. What do you know about the attack on the 4th of August? Do you link that to Hezbollah? Do you have any things that you are able to share with us?
Well, actually, no. It looks like really an accident. No one would like to destroy half of the capital of Lebanon, not even Hezbollah. It looks like an accident, of course, but there is no doubt that Hezbollah controls the Beirut port as they control Beirut airport. So if they are in control of that, how could they manage to fail this way and to destroy half of the Lebanese capital? So many casualties, such a damage. Now, another thing is, look what is happening right now. After such terrible event, after riots, demonstrations, protests, it looks like it is calmed down, and Hezbollah stay there. Nothing is really happening, and Hezbollah is just keeping threatening Israel and talking about how they will fight against Israel. This is what Nasrallah is mentioning. They are against the peace agreement with the United Emirates. They have many things to say, just not about what they are doing to Lebanon. They are destroying Lebanon. Now, put in your mind what's gonna happen if Hezbollah will attack the state of Israel with their dozens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles that they hold in Lebanon as a launching base that Iran built there. And just because Lebanon is not Lebanon, Lebanon is Iran. And they are hosting Iran. Now, Lebanon as a nation today does not have really the power, the capability. They are not backed up to throw away the Iranian forces from Lebanon. Who can do that? Strong multinational effort. But the multinational effort first need to be started in steps that Germany did. First of all, show the world that you do not agree with the Hezbollah existence as armed forces in Lebanon. I think that unfortunately there is an international dispute regarding Iran. Look at what is happening with the Iranian deal that was signed by Obama's administration and the European nations with Iran. Actually, only President Trump and Trump administration has decided to withdraw from this agreement. So the world is not united in confronting Iran. So probably we have a lot of work to do to convince even our allies. I see Australia, for example, to convince you Australians that Iran is a real threat, because the European nations has decided to go with Obama's administration and to go to the Iranian deal. Now, it is unbelievable. People are sitting around the same table, negotiate like equals with terrorists. And we know that they are terrorists. And we know what they are doing in the Middle East, and not only in the Middle East. We know what they are doing to an ally like Saudi Arabia, an ally to the United States of America, and they sit with them, negotiate with them, and let them leave. Now, only if Iran will be under strong pressure, as President Trump's policy says, maximum pressure. And maximum pressure means that there will be no cracks between all the nations that are putting the pressure. I mean, Europe, Australia, Asia, Africa, Latin America. Everyone need to put the same pressure, so they won't have any way to leave and to try to find the way out from the siege, from the blockade. Today they have the way out of the blockade. They have where to export their oil. They have how to manage. Bandar Abbas port is working. It is not under siege. So Iran actually is under pressure, but not under maximum pressure. Why? Because still there are nations, governments that are not convinced that Iran is evil forces. They are terror nation, and they use Hezbollah as their main branch. And we have a long way to go, probably, in convincing even Australia.
Yes, and I think that the entire world is suffering of the same illness, and that's the transactional illness that come before their own interests, their own values. Unfortunately, Israel is not immune to that, because let me remind you, Gal, that the Chinese are very friendly with the Iranians. They are looking at Lebanon at the moment. Even Nasrallah is calling for the Chinese to help with their currencies, and yet they're doing amazing infrastructure projects in Israel. So that commonality, there must be a strategy behind what I'm seeing on the surface, unless Israel, of course, on that instance, has also become transactional. What do you think? What's your view on this?
Well, regarding China, as you know, we are acting with the commercial issues with China with special policy. For example, we are not allowed, according to the Israeli policy, to sell our military industries products to China, for example. We can have a civil commercial relationship with China, but not any type of security or military or intelligence or cyber relationship with China. There is a special policy that is a strong policy in Israel. Yes, there is an effort from the Chinese to enter inside Israel. They are holding today the main milk company. They are building a port in Israel. They are building the metro of Tel Aviv. They are doing many projects in Israel. But still there is a policy that creates limitations. Not everything is allowed. And but let me put it this way. Look who finds easily type of brotherhood with each other. Iran, Hezbollah, North Korea, sometimes China, and others. All these families are not the best friends of United States, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and Israel. So I think in order to make sure that next step and the right step will be made, ban Hezbollah. That will send the message.
I think that's a strong message, Gal. I think that you've done it. You've given us all the right arguments, and I would like to invite people who are watching this to make comments and to tell us what is it that we are missing. If we are missing something, please tell us what it is. Gal, I want to thank you. You've been very generous with your time. I know you're very busy. Thank also Donna. Send her my best regards for me, please.
I will.